How's it going, Mike? It's really good to finally have you on the podcast. I mean, we've been trying to get this thing together for quite some time now, but I'm really excited for our conversation today. I think it'll be interesting.
Yeah, fantastic to be here. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, my travel schedule is a little hectic, and so I appreciate you dealing with the flexibility to have me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like playing 3D chess or something, juggling not only my guest schedules, but my schedule of working a full-time job, raising a kid, running a podcast. I mean, it's like the preciseness that I have to be with my schedule is insane. It, it's frustrating at times.
You'd think generative AI would have this figured out, given all the press around all the things that it can do and its miraculousness.
Oh, I've been looking into AI to be an assistant at this point.
You got to get a like hologram generation so that you can either feign being here or with your newborn.
Right. Yeah, either one. I don't know which one will be better. Well, Mike, I always start everyone off with giving their background, how you got into IT, what that journey was like, what made you want to go down this route.
Yeah, it's I guess probably not a super great story, but I was given the option to take a pre-calc course in high school or a Cisco like CCNA course, and I figured the latter had significantly less math, and so I took that route and fell in love with configuring the routers and switches, and maybe a little bit of my millennial tendencies of like instant gratification of watching routes and packets being delivered as soon as you're done with the router configuration. And so after that, I chose university based on a Cisco certified academy university. Got selected for an internship down in DC, and I've been down here ever since, just trudging away at IT, and I got to work at the help desk in undergrad, and that solidified my I guess like hunting for like tinkering and troubleshooting and all these like weird things that are it seems like when you first run into a problem, you're like, oh, it should be this simple thing. You dig in, you're like, oh, well, that's not the case. And so, yeah, just the constant brain racking, which, as you can see, has caused aggressive hair loss. But I do it anyway. It's fun time.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced my fair share of hair loss as well. That's fascinating because when I was in high school, if I was confronted with the choice of getting a CCNA or pre-calc, I would have taken pre-calc all day long.
Really?
Oh yeah. I mean, when I finally got kind of my first bit of IT experience, it was in college. And right from the start, I hated networking, everything about it. When I got out of college and I got into, the professional side of the career of actually being on the help desk and whatnot, I figured, okay, it'll be a good time to get some certs. Well, let's start with Network Plus, right? Because everywhere online says, oh, start with Network Plus. It builds you up from there, right? Yeah. And I mean, I couldn't stay awake while reading the Network Plus study guide book. I couldn't stay awake. And I'm like, all right, maybe networking isn't for me. Let's just try and make the jump into security.
Yeah. It's inordinately boring. Like you have to trudge through gobs and gobs of just such boring shit before you get to a point where you have enough knowledge to actually do really interesting stuff. And I tell people all the time that say like, well, how to like what you do is extraordinary, blah blah blah. And I'm like, anyone can do this. You just have to be willing to. It's just how much boring bullshit can you stomach before you quit. And so yeah, I mean, truly, that and that's just kind of been my mantra. And it's not different from security or software development or any of these kinds of things. There's different levels of boringness, of course, across each of these. But anyone can get into IT, get into security, software development. It's just how much are you willing to train your brain to enjoy the boring?
Yeah, That's a really good point, and I haven't heard someone explain it like that before of trudging through the boringness of what this field can actually be. Not every aspect of security I find to be, extremely like riveting or attention grabbing, right? Like network security, shocker, I do not like.
Yeah.
Application security, I do not like, right?
Yeah.
Those sorts of things I hate. But when we start talking about hacking cars, when we start talking about hacking satellites,
Hell yeah.
and all that sort of stuff, right? It starts getting interesting to me. It wakes me up, piques my interest, even though, someone would argue, well, oh, you should know the network side of that because you're going over the network. It's, those kinds of people are pushed away from me intentionally.
You know what? It's interesting to hack these kinds of I call them low level systems. You actually have to have a similar expertise around an understanding of how protocols work as you do to be like a good network engineer or internet operator. And so, it's you don't just jump into internet operations and build a global network. First, you got to understand what the hell is an IP header.
Right. Yeah, it's challenging. Like I feel like I know probably the bare minimum, right, of those areas to get by. I know what I need to know to be able to do my job effectively. But when we start talking about like the different aspects of a header or the different aspects of what's included in a body and things like that, it starts going over me. It's right. Like there's other experts out there that have that stuff. All I need to know is what my tool is queuing off of, what we're looking at, and go from there. Right. And it's absolutely a building block, but I feel like it's a specialty for a reason, right? Like not everyone needs to go,
For sure.
12 feet deep into it. Right. It's something that you can know bits and pieces about. When you were in school and getting this, certification, did you think forward of what you wanted your life or your career to look like outside of that or after it?
What's funny is I never ended up actually getting a CCNA. I took the cert once and I failed it. And I failed it because I spent too much time on one of the simulations trying to understand the totality of the network. As opposed to just solving the actual problem. And so I took that as a lesson, like, hey, if you actually pay attention and read, and I've always been a terrible test taker, but really what solidified me in that mind, this is kind of a tangent to your question, is that like, just because you have a cert or just because you don't have a cert doesn't make you make you either peg you immediately as a better network engineer or a worse engineer in either scenario. What I like to say to people that are chasing certs is if that's a thing that you need to help you study, then you do that. If you need that structure, some people don't. And say the same thing with university and higher level education. But as far as like, what the hell did I want to do with my career? I didn't really understand what I wanted to do until I took a cybersecurity class. I took I participated in the Northeastern Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition in my alma mater as the network weenie. And I started chatting with some of the hackers that were sponsoring the event and applied to a Homeland Security summer internship. And what I found down there was that being at the NSA would be the most badass thing you could ever do. Like that was my goal. And I was like, oh, it's going to take me 10 years to get into the NSA and they're never going to respond to me and blah, blah, blah. And so that's what I focused on. I applied, I don't know, probably to 150 or 200 openings all across the nation at the agency. And a year went by and nothing happened. And then I got the call from the agency, actually two of them contiguously within 10 minutes of one another, completely separate interviewers, didn't know one another, called me, no kind of overlap. That kind of like kicked off my career, like truly kicked off my cyber career when I joined the agency. So then I was like, well, shit, now what do I do with my career now that I have my dream job?
Right. Yeah, it's I always tell people it's really important that once you hit your goal to reset your goals pretty quickly afterwards, because if you don't do that, you'll get there and you'll kind of coast, right? And there's more
Totally.
to it. There's more to grow in. There's more to, become an expert in and whatnot. So, I find that really interesting, right? Of you going into the different agencies and playing around, because I myself, I spent a significant amount of time of my life applying to different agencies, interviewing, getting into different steps of the process, never hearing back, and it's a really disappointing process for me, because it's like that's the that's the area. It's just like, okay, I guess this will just never happen. I wanted it to happen. I guess it'll never happen. After you got those first 2 phone calls, how long was it until you were actually in your job at your desk doing the work?
That's a great question. I believe it was about a year, because I was still at Homeland Security at the time, and I remember this so vividly. It was like, metro system in DC is terrible, but I was transitioning from the red line to the blue line. I was in Metro Center. If any of your listeners are familiar with this, and I was about to board my train, get the call. They said, "Can you do an interview?" I was like, "Yeah, sure. Why not?" Just like blown away that I actually got the call, and then did that thing, was waiting for my next train. The next train showed up, and then I got the same call, and it shows up as, unknown, or sometimes just all zeros. And you're like, and at the time I was working at DHS. So I was like, it's DHS, whatever. Answered again, whatever. And so that was, I think, June-ish of 2011, 12, maybe 12. And then I started at the agency in 2013, something like that. Maybe my dates are wrong, but it was quick comparatively, because I didn't have any international travel. I didn't have any really close and continuing contacts with any foreign nationals, any of that kind of stuff, other than Canada, which doesn't really count. And so, 7 months, and I'd already worked for DHS, and so that probably accelerated the process. But yeah, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I think my first day was January 13th. And yeah, it was wild. First 6 months, I was intrusion analyst, doing some crazy stuff with intrusion sets, malware families, how they do things, etc. And got asked to transition over to a more operations focused team to build military intelligence and cyber operations networks. And so that's really where I got like hardcore, really deep, really, really wide understanding of the practicalities of software, or of networking, and really, the NSA let me do, and I had my boss, his boss, and his boss covered my ass hard, because I should have been fired probably 1,000 times. Cause I was pretty aggressive. I'm still pretty aggressive, but I was significantly more aggressive then. And we got done in 3 years what a lot of things they were planned for like over the next like 15 years or more.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So we spent a lot of silver bullets protecting my ass. And so the thing I learned there is like having a leader that supports you, a good leader that supports you and isn't intimidated by your aggression, and knows how to temper you and tell you like, hey, you need to shut up and sit down. Like this is gonna hurt your career. And actually listen to them. That was that's what made my career, having those folks cover my ass, and then also tell me like, hey, dumbass, like cool it.
Yeah, that's extremely important, to really understand your limits, right? And to be able to have a manager that's able to, I guess, handle your ambitions and counterweight it with the organization's expectations.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's the biggest thing. So I did a little bit, it wasn't consulting work. It was like, some third party, like vendor professional services, right. For the government earlier on in my career. And, that was the biggest thing. I mean, that was such a painful experience, right? Because for me, it's like, okay, this is 30 minutes of work, right? 30 minutes.
Yep.
And I'm on a plane going back, right? No, it was 10 days, and you have to write down every single command that you're going to run before you run it. You have to write down a reasoning behind it. You have to write down what it's doing. And then they put someone, sitting next to you that, can barely spell IT to write down exactly what you're doing. And if it doesn't match up, you have to attest to why it doesn't match up. And that was just it was so arduous, and I couldn't imagine being someone starting out your career and going into the federal government, because when you have the personality of an IT person, you're already curious, you're probably already self-driven, right? Because no one that doesn't make it in this field, right? And so you already have the perfect mentality to be successful at a startup, moving a million miles an hour, trying to make that progress, right? And then you're put into the government that is like this 1,000-year-old, behemoth that moves extremely slowly. I mean, America's not obviously 1,000 years old, but like, you know what I'm saying? Like, they're really old in every way, shape, and form. And so they move extremely slowly. I couldn't imagine how that would have been.
Yeah, DHS was fairly slow. Now, I was in the front office, and so things were moved much more quickly in the front office of Homeland Security, obviously necessitated by the needs of the homeland. And at the NSA, like, being part of the intelligence community, like, there's time sensitive things that go on, and as a result, very rarely did I run into an issue where we couldn't move fast. Well, where we were tempered and by typical bureaucratic the limitations that you would see at like maybe the FDA or USDA or some of these other non-intelligence community organizations. And so when you have this kind of mission that's like tied to national defense and has time sensitive things, like, there's less of it. Now, I wish I could have done more and done faster, but of course there are implications to moving too quickly in certain lines of work. And so, I mean, so I finished 3 projects and essentially wanted to start the 4th, and they like kind of patted me on my head, and they're like, you've done enough. You need to chill. And so as soon as that happened, I was like, screw this, I'm out. And that's when I made my leap to startup land in 2015.
So you mentioned that you worked on, what was it, intrusion prevention or intrusion detection for the agency. A part of that, do you also deal with insider threat? I mean, obviously, I would assume that's like totally separate functionality and whatnot. But when we're thinking about intrusion detection, primarily you're thinking about external trying to get in. But a part of that is also insider threat, right? Someone could be compromised that's already on the end and, get things that they shouldn't be. So in that team or in that workspace, are you also thinking about both sides of it, or primarily just external in?
Yeah, for us, it was just external stuff, focused on the agency's goal, which is foreign intelligence. There's I'm sure many teams within the agency that focus on that, but that wasn't my charge.
Yeah, I always I just find the agencies interesting, right? Because it's something I never I always wanted to get into, never got into it. But
there's all the secrecy around it makes it sound so sexy and interesting. And at the end of the day, like, you're just sitting at a cube like everybody else, tapping at a keyboard like everybody else, which is kind of cool, or extraordinarily cool, depending on what you're working on. But there's a lot of allure and secrecy, which drives a lot of the FOMO and whatever else. But it's I could have easily been saddled in one of the shitty roles with shitty leaders and have ended up rage quitting after 6 months because I wasn't given the latitude to do the things that I wanted to do. And so I just got extraordinarily lucky where I landed. But yeah, that's really just matter of fact.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good point. Like when I first went on site to the agency that I did work with, you drive up to this very nondescript building, in the middle of the mountains, right? You go inside, the lobby is fantastic. You don't see any cubes or anything like that. And then you walk like 100 feet, 150 feet, and it's just a cube farm. Like, what the hell? Like, I did not expect this, like, at all, especially at this facility. It's just nothing but cubes. And they have several floors of it,
Oh, yeah. That describes every headquarters I've ever walked into of any of the agencies.
Yeah.
And I've been to a lot of them.
With you working for that agency, do you have the opportunity regularly to, engage with other agencies, go on site with other agencies and whatnot? Is it once you're in and cleared sort of thing, you're able to go where you need to go, or does not everyone get that opportunity?
Most don't. Again, I was extraordinarily lucky on the things we were doing and things that are working on. And so I was, afforded the opportunity. And, when the agencies need your help, they're willing to move mountains so that things are easy for you to do the things. But if they don't need your help or they don't want it, maybe they need it, but they don't want it, they make it extraordinarily difficult. And thankfully, I never ran into any of those hurdles. And so, yeah, it just looking back at the 3 years, it's like the closest thing to a nerd can be to like James Bondy than that I could ever imagine. Yeah, it was just cool. I'd go, 2-3 months and be like, okay, I've seen everything. And then my brain would explode at some cool new shit that I saw. And that just happened consistently until I left. So really cool. But again, I got super lucky because there's a lot of really boring shit across at the NSA and at every agency.
Yeah, I had a friend that told me that, once you get in and you get read into different things, like your mind will just blow up with like, oh, I can't believe that we can do this, that we have this capability and whatnot. And then they're going to sit you at a desk at a cube and they're going to give you the most basic thing to work on. You're going to feel so overqualified for your job and whatnot. It was just like, it's a really interesting, like stark contrast, from what you would think going into it. But so when you're at the agency, towards the end of your tenure there, are you thinking, oh, I want to go into the startup world. I want to go, I don't know, work for Cisco or something like that, because you have that specialty. You'd probably be worth your weight in gold, to Cisco, I would think, at least. What were you thinking? Maybe what spurred the thought to, make that jump?
I wasn't really. I had met a friend, or I'd met a guy through a mutual friend at a barbecue. We call them Nerd Barbecue every year. We got like big data centers based out here in Ashburn, DC area, and a friend of ours throws a barbecue, and so I got an invite and met this dude who at the time was an expert in software-defined networking, OpenFlow. And one of the few at the time before, obviously OpenFlow's dead. And so I wanted to push the envelope, continue pushing the envelope at the agency. And I said, after a couple of weeks of meeting him, I reached out and said, hey, how do you get people to buy into this SDN OpenFlow bullshit? And he goes, why don't you just come do it for me at the startup and I'll double your salary? And I was like, so it was like, there was no intention. I wanted to continue pushing at the agency and working at the agency, living in DC with, the hour commute, blah, 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 all that kind of crap. I was just like, I can tangibly increase the way that I'm living right now. And from, what I was sold, like there are no roadblocks. You just do all the things. And at the beginning, once I transitioned to my first startup, it certainly was that. It was cool, and it was the first time, not to sound like an asshole, but it was the first time that I was surrounded by people where I was like, oh shit, I'm the dummy in the group. Like, I'm the idiot. And it was the best feeling in the world. I was like, oh, like this is fucking awesome. And so, yeah, it was an amazing, I was just there for like 2 years. But that original infrastructure team that I was on was just a group of absolute badasses.
Yeah, that's what you bring up with the the money side of it, right? Now, where I'm at with my career, yeah, I'd probably be a great resource for the agencies or something like that, right? Whatever you want to call it. But the pay cut would be so substantial that I would literally never be able to convince my wife to be like, yeah, we're going to move across the country. We're going to take 50% pay cut. And I'm going to go do work that I can't talk to you about for the next 4 years. And then we're going to go do something else, right? Like, that's an insane sell.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a great,
it's perfect when you're right out of like school, when you're getting started. It's absolutely perfect. But anything beyond is just undoable.
Yeah. The US government has a really, I think, shitty outlook on this thing. Like, you get trained, 2, 3, 4 years, you become well-versed in this thing, doing only certain people can. And then they bounce because they can make more money and there's no resources outside of this. Where I think, or a country that I think does really well with this is Israel. Israel has this, obviously this elite cyber force, blah, blah, blah. And it's specifically built, because they're only conscripted for 2 years. It's specifically built to get them as smart as they can possibly be. And then when they get shit out of the military, they have all these entrepreneurial resources, and the government helps them fundraise and all these kinds of things. And so as a result, Israel's startup market, especially in cyber, like, it's really the only competitor, at least in the cyber startup landscape in the world, at least that I'm concerned about, with like patent infringement, that kind of shit. But just an amazing program. And if the US government had a similar kind of program with computer science and cyber and all this thing, like it would drive, I think, innovation in the US even harder than it already is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I have on quite a few people from, Israel that have founded companies, and, every single one of them have the same story. Like, I did this really cool thing, for Israel's military, the IDF, whatever it might be. Right. And now we're starting this really cool company of doing this, legacy thing, like, I don't know, vulnerability management or application security, whatever it might be. We're doing it differently than what everyone else is doing. And they learn those skills, over there. They learn those skills, from their government teaching them. And that's really interesting what you said, that they even help them get funding, right? Like, that's so abnormal, right? From anything that you would hear about in America, because from what I understand, once you're out, you're out. It's like you're dead to them. They don't know you anymore. It's like they don't want to deal with you.
Depends on how valuable your knowledge is. But yeah, in general, yes, that's good. That's the case.
Yeah, it's like you really get cut off, and so like that avenue of still progressing and pushing forward in those areas are I guess that kind of limited. Was that your experience too, or maybe not so much?
I mean, I never had I kind of like dashed out the door there, right? And I never looked back. And so I don't really have any. Now I know if I called, anyone that's still there, or even those that have contacts to those that are still there, like, I could get through the process again in a heartbeat. I know that, no doubt. And so I think that there's again, the skill set is really important. How you left is really important. Like, I didn't leave on bad terms. I just left because the opportunity was greater on the outside. And so, I I've gotten. I think that the government could do more. Our government could do more to entice on entrepreneurship and that kind of stuff, especially in these kinds of programs, especially coming out of the military, right? Like, there's stuff that the cyber operators in the armed forces of the U.S. can do that civilians just can't, based on our laws. And so there's some really cool shit, and this is exactly what the Israeli military cyber operators are doing. Is they're learning all these really cool tactics, and they're taking the ones that aren't national secrets and applying them to defense mechanisms in these new vendors, or even, I mean, they're all defense mechanisms, right? But taking potentially interesting attack vectors or attack operations and morphing them into more of a blue team type op. So yeah, I think I have nothing bad to say about my time at the agency, other than they could have paid me more. but shit, anywhere you go, like that's kind of the sentiment. I'd be like, I don't know anybody that's like, oh yeah, like I'm cool with this. If you don't have to give me more money. I think everyone would take a pay increase regardless of what they make.
Right. Right. You're never gonna turn that down. I mean, most of us have significant others that'll shoot us if we don't take that, right?
Fair. Or just my nagging desire to buy more wine.
Yeah. That's a rabbit hole that we could go down for easily another hour. I fairly recently, in the last couple of years, I started going down the whiskey rabbit hole.
Oh yeah.
Where now I'm at the point where the whiskeys that I want, you can't find it, in the States, because it's made here, but it's sold at other countries.
To Japan.
So now it's like, okay, I have to go register for this auction and bid for it. And, it's a rabbit hole that, I mean, I guess I'm overall happy I went down. I'm sure my wife isn't.
You're right.
But,
so are you admitting that you're a tater?
I mean, I guess.
Yeah. I couldn't deal with the tatering for the listenership that doesn't know what tater is. It's those that chase these super sensationalized bottles of whiskey. But what I found is that if you join, there's a bunch of like private barrel programs. One of my favorites is our bourbon on Reddit, and they have fantastic bottles. It's run. I can't remember this dude's name, but his handle is J8KE. I assume it's pronounced Jake. That's how I read it every time I get an email from him. But it's a fantastic program, and I've gotten amazing bottles from it. Whistle Pig, Penelope. Barrel. But yeah, I can talk about whiskey forever, tequila, wine. I suppose, like, an alcoholic is part of the nature of being in IT and cyber. I think drinking culture is real.
Yeah, it's I mean, at a lot of places it's even like encouraged. Like I remember my first big role. I was working, at a credit bureau. And the director, once or twice a week would invite everyone to go to the bar with him. And he would pay for everything. Whatever you want to get, just go get it, Yeah. And it's like, man, this is a lot of fun, but like, what's the lasting impact? Because, now I'm expected to show up tomorrow on time, which I always did. But man, it's a different ball game when you've been out all night drinking with your director and, handling it like that. But
the other thing is, like, you're expected to go, right? And if you're not, then you're seeing be made a pariah and all these kinds of things. And so what I've found, like, what we try to do at Tract, and what granted our team is small, and I think we do that fairly successfully, is we do team things that are fairly inclusive, especially for those that don't drink. And I'm very happy that this kind of mocktail culture has started to make its way into mainstream. And I don't think we've been, I fly the team out to a city every 6 months, so we can do in-person things because we're completely remote. But I don't think we've been to a place that doesn't have mocktails. And so Even we're going to New Orleans in a couple of weeks for our end of year planning sessions and look back. And every place we go to, even in the drinking culture that is New Orleans, there are mocktails for the team members that don't drink. So there are plenty of opportunities where I can see organizations that don't have these kinds of inclusive events. And so, we try to be mindful about that at Tract, and I, implore everybody to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's talk about what it's like, I guess, founding a startup and going through that whole process. I have a friend that I worked for earlier on in my career, and now he's a CEO of a company. And he said the biggest difference between, his last role that I knew him from and his current role is that if there's something wrong with the company, something wrong with the culture, whatever it might be, he used to be able to just point the finger, at the CEO and be like, hey, it's that guy's the problem. He has to do something. I can't do anything. But now he's like, no, the finger, like, I can't point it at my board. It's me. I'm the one where if I wake up one day and I make a bad decision, I'm the one that has to correct that. It's no one else's job to do that. So can we just talk a little bit about that change? Because I would think that change, that switch in mentality, didn't happen overnight. But can we talk about how you went down this path of being a founder of a startup and, what you're doing and whatnot?
Yeah, I think the mentality of ownership, regardless of the scenario, happened far before I became a founder. And I think that if it hadn't, I would have certainly failed. I'm certainly not a natural empath, and anyone that knows me, even for 10 minutes or so, will tell you that they concur. And so I've spent a lot of time putting a lot of effort into being good at being human, is what I call it. And one of the books that I read that changed, it certainly had the largest impact, and I read it at least once a year. It's called Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbringer Institute, and it's absolutely fantastic. Essentially, the plot is that, or the focus of the book is that you should be treating people like people that have wants and feelings just like yours, as opposed to objects and hurdles that need to be bulldozed in order to achieve your goals. And of course, I'm butchering it, and I implore you all to read it. It's only 400 pages, it's a very quick read, and it's written as fiction, so it's really interesting. So yeah, no, I think that your friend is spot on. There's if anything goes wrong in the company, it's my fault. And I truly believe that it's not just just conjecture and lip service. I believe that my team would echo that. But I think you truly have to believe this thing. Otherwise, it is just lip service, and you foster this culture of hate and discontent and all these kinds of things. And so founding Tract was, where my last startup got acquired. Last startup I worked at, it wasn't my startup, got acquired by a large security company, and this problem that we're solving at Tract, I've been dealing with it for over a decade, and finally, I just the reason I started Tract was just rage. I was like, this problem is so inordinately difficult and frustrating and disruptive that I just have to solve it. It's solvable. Well, I just have to solve it. And never look back. I tell people that this is the best job I've ever had. And the day, if ever the day comes that I have to, that I'm not at Tract anymore, and I have to get a real job, I call it a real job because then you have people that you have to answer to and bullshit that you it's not your baby anymore. That's what really keeps me driving forward, right? One, I never want a real job again, and two, the team that we have is just the absolute best team I've ever worked with, and yeah, I get to be the dumb guy again, which is fantastic. So yeah, I there are a handful of these like CEO founder groups that you go to, and they say, describe a founder, being a founder in one word, and people say responsibility or a couple words, right? Responsibility and leadership and all this kind of bullshit. And when it came to me, I was just like, it's fucking awesome, best job ever, like just fucking awesome.
Yeah, that's it's a different kind of mentality, I guess, right? Because if it's going to succeed, it's on you, and if it fails, it's on you. And from my perspective, right? And I've talked about this before. Having a family and going from a 9 to 5 to doing your own thing is maybe the most like scary thing I could think of, right? Because like there's no room for error. There's no room for messing up or not working hard, not succeeding. All those things matter, and they just don't randomly happen, right? They happen over years of extremely hard work and dedication, and always, fine tuning, even the smallest things so that they come together and work correctly, right? So what's the solution that you have built currently, and what's the problem that you're trying to solve with your company?
Yeah, great question. So what we found is that most people, when they're going to fix their software vulnerabilities, are crossing their fingers hoping patches won't break their shit. And so we built a platform that not only unifies vulnerability management and patch management, essentially this false dichotomy that's been perpetuated in the workplace, where security only does security things and IT only does IT things, and they throw each shit over the wall and under the bus and all this kind of shit. In addition to building this unified platform to do both, we also let you know how patches have broken other people's shit before you apply it to yours. And we do this through crowdsourcing. We're able to collect telemetry on how patches break other systems, or how they're affecting other systems as we install them, and then we anonymize it and share it with everybody else in real time. So come Patch Tuesday or whatever, you can see, 4 people have applied this patch. We haven't detected an issue, that no one's reported one. 400, 4,000, 4 million. Right, we're not there yet, but that's the idea. Is this collective defense idea, which isn't obviously it's not new, right? This is a NATO term, but also the first startup I worked at, called Iron Cybersecurity, which unfortunately just declared bankruptcy, founded by General Keith Alexander, was really this eye opener, a fantastic idea of like, you can't, like, this is a cliche thing to say, like the defenders have to be right every time, the bad guys only have to be right once, and it's not reasonable to expect one company to defend against all the things. And I even argue, like, one particular tool used by everybody sharing all this intelligence, still not reasonable to expect everybody to be right 100% of the time. But it's as close as we can get to perfection. And that's, crowdsourcing data, working together, blah, blah, blah. And I think the best what's the word I'm looking for? Example of how this works, or how it's been useful, is General McChrystal's book called Team of Teams. What an amazing! It essentially details how JSOC was created. I believe for the war in Afghanistan, getting the intelligence communities to cooperate, so we could actually make progress there. An absolute killer of a book. Really, really well written, and just super interesting, both from a behavioral science standpoint, but also, like, if you're interested in how the agencies, the military, these kinds of things work, it really, really cool.
Oh, wow. I'll have to definitely pick up that book. I took like a few month hiatus from reading books and or listening to audiobooks, right? Like the first like 6 months of the year, I just like steamrolled through my book list.
Yeah.
And now I'm just like burnt out on books, but I'm slowly, ramping back up and looking for that right book. So I'll definitely check out that Team of Teams book that you mentioned.
Yeah, I get it. I haven't read anything anything for work outside of like real work shit, but for books, in a long time. I complain. I fly all the time. I'm on United all the time, and I complain about Wi-Fi not being available. But every time it doesn't work, especially when I'm on a coast to coast flight across the U.S., I silently cheer because I can actually read. And I've been reading fantasy novels is this kind of way for me to one, I just love fantasy, but it's a great way to just kind of like decompress and recharge. And so, yeah, I haven't read a business book or like a how to be good at being human book in a long time. It's all about, shooting fireballs out of fingers and dragons and all that kind of shit. So yeah, but I get it. If you don't pace yourself, it's hard. It's hard. It's a lot of reading these kinds of books is draining, but sometimes at the same time really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It can be really draining and exciting all at the same time, I guess. So with what you're doing right now, that's really interesting. I wonder if there's a way for you to somehow plug into, like the error feeds of different systems, whether or not someone's a customer of yours, right? Like, let's say someone deploys a patch on Patch Tuesday for Microsoft, and you just see the error report, like, oh, someone had an issue with this thing, right? Is there an avenue for that? Is there a way that you're potentially exploring gaining new intelligence or stats around those sorts of things, or is it strictly more open source or through your own customer base, I guess?
Yeah, right now it's just through our customer base, and we're looking to build this open community about to help operators understand, like, essentially what I call operational risk, right? Like I say this all the time. Is like, security is not free, and I'm not talking about cash, right? There's operational risk associated with implementing security controls, and at best, the security people are just ignorant to it. At worst, they just don't care. And so today the way that we operators reason about, like, is this patch going to break my shit, is we go onto Reddit, we go to Twitter, we go onto these websites and pray. And so what we've built at Tract is this idea that you can see how many people have installed this thing, what's the percentage of fail rate globally across our install base. We're working on what I call similarity analytic, which essentially shows like how similar is your shit to my shit, and did it break that stuff? And over time, we want to build that and expand that. And so we have, currently the platform is entirely free. But one of the things that's great about our platform is that finding and fixing your vulnerabilities across all of your operating systems will always be free. And we support every major operating system except for Mac OS. Mac OS will come live in Q1 of next year. But it's why we've had so much success, I think, in our early adoption, even though our product is generally fairly infantile in its development stage. We've been in market for about 6 months with what we call a private beta, but it's fairly it's certainly stable. But there's of course always improvements. But yeah, anyone can log in, go, tract.com/sign up. All you need is a business email address. And if you want to use it on your personal lab, just reach out to me, mike@tract.com, and I can set you up an account that gets past the business filter.
Yeah, that's really fascinating because, I literally earlier today, I got off a call of someone arguing with me that all of our applications are so extremely unique that we can't group these things together in configurations. I'm like, guys, look, that doesn't make any sense. That, we're using open source libraries, right? Yeah. Like we may be deploying them differently, but we're not rewriting Java.
Yeah, unlikely. Like people say this all the time. It's like you may have one or two arbitrarily compiled executables on your endpoint, but over 99% of your system is fucking Linux, right? It's RHEL or it's Debian, whatever. It's running a Linux kernel, or it's Windows, but it's 99% the same. And so the thing that you're afraid of, like now, if you're like afraid of upgrading from like Java 5 to Java 9, okay, that's kind of scary. I'll give you that. But keeping up with minor updates, like we've deployed about 2,000 patches now across all of our agent installs, and not a single one has caused a single disruption. This includes 5 Patch Tuesdays now. Is that right? April, May, June, July, August. 7 Patch Tuesdays. And not a single one has broken. Now we've had some failures, and we've been able to deal with those, but failures that didn't cause any disruptions, which is a big deal. And so my mantra is less than 2% of patches ever fail, and this is fueled by an independent study or a private study. But people aren't really going to play Russian roulette with their critical infrastructure. But even when it does cause failures, the reduction in cyber risk, even doing so blindly, is far greater than the operational risk. But at the end of the day, operators, you're asking them to risk impacting their lives, right? Maybe they got a Tinder date or a daughter's recital or a dinner, whatever the hell, a book club, whatever it is, like a wine tasting, for example. Like if you're going to patch today or patch next week because your life's potentially going to be impacted, like I'm pushing. Like I'm not board of directors. I'm not the CEO. To your earlier point, right? Like I don't get paid to worry about that shit. I got my life to live, and so that's what we're trying to solve for, is giving people confidence and being able to quantify what their fear actually is in these things, and declare what safety is in a handful of types of thresholds, so that they can actually auto patch, but in a way that's safe and compliant with their organization, but most importantly, the operators' lives.
Yeah, that definitely really hits home. When I was working at another company many years ago, when I lost all my hair, if we had to deploy a patch on a certain system, it was like, okay, let me cancel plans for the weekend.
Yep.
Who's on call, make sure that the right person's on call. Like there was so much worry, and that would be all that I would think about for 2 or 3 weeks.
Yep.
And it sounds dumb, but these updates would break our system in so many different, seemingly random ways, and the vendor would never tell us if there was other reports of this issue. They would never tell us if there was other issues in other customers. It's like, guys, if I need to deploy a hot fix after I deploy this update, just tell me. I'm more than happy to deploy it, because I don't want any issues, at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. waking me up. That's when I'm going to be mad, and of course they would never tell me. And of course it would always happen, like almost every single time. That was the most painful thing you could ever go through as an engineer, as an operator, going through this.
No. Yeah, no, don't get me wrong. In the early 2000s and late 90s, like shit broke all the time. And so this is where all that fear is steeped in. And what's really interesting, and this kind of goes into my interest in human behaviors, is that it's non-generational, meaning old fucks like you and me have taught Gen Z to be afraid of patching, even though empirically the likelihood of an issue coming up is almost zero. And so it's really, really interesting to understand. And one of the cool things, one of the things that I just enjoy doing is getting people to change behavior, which is inordinately difficult, but doing so in a way that's comfortable enough for them that they're even willing to try it at all.
Well, Mike, I think we're unfortunately running out of time here. I feel like we could go for another hour or two,
especially with bourbon.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we'll do a part 2 to this episode. I think that would be fun, but we have to have bourbon, something like that. But before I let you go, how about you tell my audience, where they can find you, where they can find your company, if they wanted to learn more information and maybe sign up for getting their hands on the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. You can reach out, support@trackd.com, and it's spelled TRACKD. For you Unix nerds, it's TrackD. For those that are not Unix nerds, it's just Tracked. But Mike at track.com, track.com/sign up, whatever you guys want. LinkedIn, Mike Starr on LinkedIn, and the bald one that shows up. And yeah, happy to have a conversation either about Tracked or anything in general, cyber, computer science, behavioral, things in like how humans behave, wine, whatever it is. But be warned, I can talk ad nauseum. So
awesome. Well, thanks, Mike. I really appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate everyone listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe, for having me. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Cheers. See you, everyone.